On 20th of March, Leonid Radvinsky, the owner of the subscription-based site OnlyFans, died at the age of 43. He left a net worth of 4.7 billion American dollars at the time of his death and was a fervent supporter of the state of Israel, donating $11 million to the AIPAC lobby. So basically, American gooners and OnlyFans girls were supporting the state of Israel through a business, which, let me remind you, the adult entertainment industry brings in tens of billions of dollars to the economy every year and is projected to grow even more in the future. This brings us to the question, is the relationship that we have with sex and intimacy in this postmodern age alright? And the answer to that for many in the recent years is a plain no. And this sentiment will only continue to grow as shown by the general response to Radvinsky's death, which, for the lack of better words, were not very sympathetic to him. Regardless of how much of a horrifying impact Radvinsky had on the minds of millions of young people about sex and intimacy, he simply capitalized on our basic and natural need for physical intimacy. If he did not start OnlyFans, someone else would have stepped and filled the shoes. Maybe that time they wouldn't give US politicians $11 million on the behalf of Israel, but never mind. Sex has been a part of every single culture in human society. If they haven't been, they would have died out. Simple as that. Some societies were relatively more open about sex and even the sexuality spectrum in general, while most societies were sexually repressive to some degree, because the natural conclusion was that sex was risky and deadly. Women were way more weaker than men, at least on a physical scale, and were fertile for a certain time in their life. Meanwhile, men were stronger and basically could impregnate anyone for their whole life after a certain point in their puberty. This led to there being a big power imbalance between the two genders. There always was a chance that sexual intercourse would lead to a pregnancy. That is why there was a huge emphasis on chastity, not anymore clearly, and there being strong taboo around premarital sex. The whole thing was basically about pregnancy, and I would argue it was not about the sex itself. This later transformed into an honor or a shame-based system where the act of saving yourself for marriage or being a virgin was the expected before marriage. But something came into the scene and changed everything. Contraceptives. Hey, real quick, if you like what you're watching so far, then please do like and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel to grow, and thank you. Contraceptives have been around for thousands of years, and people have been crazy for contraceptives all throughout human history. There was this plant, hold on, let me look it up. Silphium, yes, silphium was this plant used in the Greco-Roman world, which was used as a contraceptive because it was effective. Too effective that it was over-harvested and it basically became extinct now. It was so valuable that it doesn't exist anymore. If we go even back, the ancient Egyptians would mix honey and cow dung and use it for, And contraceptives did not need to be a physical substance you put on or used. The Catholic Church has been very clear and very consistent on its stand against contraceptives. Any sexual act is solely for procreation. However, the Catholic Church does allow something called the natural family planning, also called the NFP, which basically tracks a woman's fertility cycle, and the couple basically abstain from sex during the most fertile periods. Yeah, not really stopping conception, but still is kind of a contraceptive act in general. The point is, people have been crazy for contraceptives all throughout human history. We just like doing the act without any unwanted consequences. So for the most part in history, society kind of stayed the same regarding intimacy, mostly repressive and chastity being the norm before marriage at least. Contraceptives got better and better, except for that's kind of gross. Doctors started experimenting with chemicals and discovered hormones like estrogen and progesterone. This was revolutionary because it demystified a lot about what actually causes pregnancy instead of shoving random things into the Now there is a key figure without which we really cannot talk about birth control, especially in the United States. You might have heard about her. Her name is Margaret Sanger. the woman who opened the first birth control clinic in America and founded the Planned Parenthood. Her father, Michael Hennessy Higgins, moved to the US from Ireland and fought in the Civil War as a Union drummer at the age of 15. He was a progressive man, by most means, identifying himself as a socialist and an agnostic, which very likely influenced Margaret because she would identify herself as a socialist. Her mother, Anne, conceived 18 times and gave birth to 11 live children. Now, at the time, availability of any contraceptive information was limited due to government intervention with the Comstock Act of 1873, which prohibited, among many other things, mailing contraceptives or even information regarding anything to do with contraceptives. While working as a nurse, Margaret visited many working-class women, immigrant women, in their homes who frequently went under childbirth, miscarriages, and self-induced abortions. One of these many women was Sadie, who had a case of severe sepsis due to a self-induced abortion. She begged the attending doctor to tell her how she could prevent this from happening again, to which the doctor replied, "You want your cake while you eat it too, don't you? Well, it can't be done. I'll tell you the only sure thing to do. Tell Jake to sleep on the roof." Basically, the doctor was saying, don't have sex to a woman who was dying in front of him from sepsis. Margaret was later called again to Sadie's apartment and found that Sadie had died attempting another self-induced abortion. Sadie ended the story by saying, "I threw my nursing bag in the corner and announced that I would never take another case until I had made it possible for working women in America to have the knowledge to birth control." Now, there is a side note. The story probably never happened and Sadie never existed at all. This was rather an imaginative account of Margaret Sanger's patients, whose cases would have been very similar to Sadie's, and it was not too far-fetched from reality. This was common. This was fairly common. Long story short, Sanger and a very wealthy patron named Catherine McCormick financed much of the research that eventually led to the birth control pill that we know today. One last thing about Margaret Sanger. People often call her an eugenicist, and that is kind of true. Eugenics was a popular sentiment back then. Unfortunately, even among progressives of that time, this was before the Austrian painter did what he did, and eugenics was widely rejected after that. Many people before that came to the conclusion that society could be improved by discouraging or preventing some specific people from reproducing. For Margaret Sanger, it was poor black people. Yeah, she launched something called the Problematic Project in 1939. The goal was to expand contraceptives to poor black communities in the South. This, combined with her self-professed eugenicist title, you would not be wrong if you felt this was problematic. You might argue that she tried to regulate reproduction among the poor and minorities. On the other hand, you have people like me who would kind of defend Sanger. Hear me out. Many black women and many from the black community actively wanted access to contraception and supported the project. Women just wanted contraceptives regardless of their race or class or ethnicity. Regardless, that's all about Margaret Sanger. For now, she will come back again later. Moving on. In 1960, the first oral contraceptive pill, Innovit, was approved by the FDA. The access was limited and unmarried women could not easily obtain it. And in the late 1960s, it coincided with the sexual revolution and also with second-wave feminism. At its core, the sexual revolution basically more or less severed the strong tie between physical intimacy and marriage and normalized premarital sex. This might be a good thing or a bad thing according to where you stand politically. And this was just in time when birth control was being widely adopted, in America at least. You could say that the birth control pill led the sexual revolution, or at the least was a major player in it. And without the pill, this sexual revolution would not have had the same effect it had on society. And I would argue that we are in the middle of the outcome of this revolution. The sexual revolution simply never ended, and it is still going on to this very day. And I would argue things like OnlyFans widespread, the decline in marriage rates, and surprisingly, the lack of sexual activity among the younger generation is a direct result of the sexual revolution. The genuine conclusion that I and many others have reached or questioned is when does the revolution end or declare victory? Is our society just going to keep progressing in terms of sexual liberation? Or do we collectively stop when we feel that we have reached a somewhat acceptable position on sexual liberation and freedom? And the answer to that is a mostly no. The truth is, the current society that we all live in is so driven by profit margins and finance that it is bound to drive sexual liberation movements forward without any end, simply because it is incredibly profitable. Because sex is incredibly profitable. It has been for basically when we became organized societies. Now, I want to clear something up. I am a left-leaning person, and I, along with many others on the left, maybe not that many, are critiquing the effect the sexual revolution had on society. You don't need to be a manic, ultra-Catholic conservative to criticize the corporate-led sexual liberation movements, which are inherently capitalist and have socially destroyed how millions of young people see sex and physical intimacy. At some point in our history, the corporatists who love and worship money over everything else teamed up with the liberals who wanted to progress the sexual liberation movement over anything else, like class politics. Class politics died and was replaced by a strictly social and identity-driven politics. Class politics simply went to the gutters. We went from a culture of almost sexual repression and authority to a culture where women now feel pressured into sexual liberation and casual sex and hookup norms and everything else. To be sexually liberated can itself be a social expectation. And this matters because we objectively live in a world which values vanity, almost insane and toxic beauty standards, and this constant 24/7 feed of perfect looking people on our phones, TV, and on our streets where we drive to work. We cannot catch a break. It is suffocating, and people are unconsciously waking up to this fact. There was a trend recently, you might be familiar with it, the trad wives. It was a pretty big deal back then. Trad wives, which stand for traditional wife, is basically a woman who embodies the traditional image of a feminine, submissive woman willing to have a male authority over her. It was a controversial thing for a while. Many liberals basically said it was patriarchy. Some say women can independently choose this scenario and it falls under personal rights, which falls under women's rights. One of the critiques that I don't see people talking about, and one that I personally subscribe to when talking about this specific topic, is that these trad wives influencers which you saw are not actually really trad wives. These women are one of the few minority of the women who can have a husband who can afford to run a house on a single income. And these women, they are working and earning money from social media, which does not really fit the definition of a woman who is financially dependent on her husband. Regardless, there is now a visible pushback on sexual liberation politics. I don't think this is being done out of return to tradition, reject modernity type of viewpoint. I don't think it's even religiously driven. It has more to do with loneliness and distrust of modern society in general. People are tired of liberals and conservative politics. People are skeptical of AI and what it could do in terms of friendships and relationships, which is something very fearful. I don't know what is going to happen in the future. You have probably heard headlines about how the human population is collapsing and that young people are giving up on having children in every developed first world country. You know who would be happy to hear this? Margaret Sanger. I told you she would come back into the story. She was facing imprisonment in the United States for printing illegal pamphlets about contraceptives. She managed to escape to Europe, where she found that it was ahead of America in its more relaxed and openness in terms of contraceptives. Of course, it was contraceptives. It was also in England where she became a part of the Malthusian movement, which basically concerned itself with overpopulation. People were freaking out at that time about human population. Human population was basically booming at that time, and there was not enough resources for everyone. Sanger and many other from the Malthusian movement believed that overpopulation was a major concern for all of humanity. They believed that if human population was left unchecked, we would eventually run out of resources, and that would lead to horrifying conflicts and genocides and massacres and a lot of bad things. And this Malthusian sentiment went on for decades. People were concerned about overpopulation and resource scarcity. Now it's basically the opposite. Fertility rates have dropped massively since the beginning of the sexual revolution. Now there are worries about how there aren't enough young people to replace the older workforce, and many governments are begging their population to have children. Now, I predict as this problem gets worse, more people will criticize the birth control pill for getting into this situation. Maybe not everyone, but I believe the sentiment will rise. It's simple. Birth control pills, women get more autonomy, family declined. We are now in a demographic mess. Can we ban birth control? The answer is mostly no. No mainstream conservative is out there wanting to ban birth control. Birth control is an essential part of human society now and is here to stay for the foreseeable future. I don't want to ban contraceptives. This is not an anti-contraceptive video by any means. But regardless of your political position, progressive or conservative, you have to accept that the results of the sexual revolution and widespread contraceptive use are still to be seen in human society. If we really want to be scientific, we have to study ourselves from an analytical point of view, which takes decades or even centuries to see the effect and come to a conclusion after such a drastic and a powerful change. This is a brand new world where women can choose when and if they even want to have children at all and still enjoy sex without the worries of a pregnancy. This has obviously weakened a lot of the structures that held society intact practically since humans became civilized, and I guess we will live to see the results before we die, or at least the beginning of the results. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching the whole thing. I really appreciate it. If you liked the video, then please like and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel to grow. And wow, this was an interesting topic. I had fun making it. I tried a few new things in the editing style, which I frankly like. Let me know down what you think. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.